We'll make do. Okay. Bismillah.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and good evening, everyone.
Walaikum salam.
We are going to start the Friday night halaqah / Friday night circle right now. My name is Ania Zaman. I am an alumni from Texas A&M. I graduated in December of 2021. Just to set the scene for y'all, October is Domestic Violence Prevention and Awareness Month, and the Office of Health Promotion at Texas A&M University always collaborates with on-campus resources as well as off-campus resources to create a plethora of events throughout the month of October. So this year, we have asked them to collaborate with ICBCS to address domestic violence as well as family dynamics in the Muslim community from an Islamic perspective. Imam Mahad is going to do the Islamic perspective, while Health Promotion is going to introduce their who they are and the services that they have for students in the last 10 minutes of this presentation. Just to give y'all some statistics, according to a special report by the Bureau of Justice Statistics, 1 in 4 women and 1 in 9 men have experienced intimate partner physical violence, intimate partner violence, and/or intimate partner stalking, which has resulted in negative health outcomes such as injury, fearfulness, post-traumatic stress disorder, as well as utilizing victim services to receive help. Domestic violence has also been discussed in different ethnic communities, and resources have been developed within those communities. However, domestic violence has not been brought up from a faith / religious aspect as much, especially in the Muslim community. In 2011, the Peaceful Families Project and Project Sakina conducted a survey that included 801 American Muslims and found that 31% experienced abuse within an intimate partner relation, and 53% experienced some form of domestic violence throughout their lifetime. According to the most recent Association of American Universities survey on assault and misconduct conducted recently in 2019, 12.9% of students from Texas A&M experience intimate partner violence, and 42.7% experience harassment from another student, faculty, or staff member. So as we can clearly see, this is a problem in the College Station, Bryan area, as well as within our Muslim community. So right now I'm going to pass it off to Imam Mahad so he can start talking about family dynamics as well as domestic violence prevention from an Islamic perspective. Thank you.
Before we begin, if I could ask the men to just like grab your chair and just come right over here if possible. Just move a little bit over, inshallah, just for the sake of my neck, if you could help me out. Thank you guys so much. Thank you guys. Yeah, you can just populate this entire area. Feel free. There we go. Now this is easier to kind of function with. Okay. All right. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. We begin with the praise and thanks of God that has allowed us to be able to come together and speak about a topic that many people will shy away from, whether in religious groups or non-religious groups. These are topics that people don't want to talk about. It's uncomfortable speaking about sex, politics, religion, family life. These are all things that are difficult. The one thing from anyone who has studied Islam at a high level, you can tell that the Messenger of God, Muhammad, did not shy away from taboo topics. He did not shy away from topics of sexuality. He did not shy away from topics of abuse. He did not shy away of topics that were of a quote-unquote taboo nature. This was not what the Messenger of God did, but it's unfortunate that many times in our own cultural backgrounds, or even that which we bring over here to ourselves, or our own understandings, we say, well, no, this is something we shouldn't be talked about. Well, what's going to happen if other people find out? If there was any kind of oppression that was ever brought about in society, the Messenger of God, all the messengers of God, always spoke up. The story that we read on Fridays, we read the story from Surah Kahf, right? The story of the young men and women in the cave. And it also references the story of Moses, who is with Khidr. And Moses says what to him? He says, Insha'Allah, by the will of God, you'll find me patient. Every single time Khidr does something that's contrary to what Moses is okay with, and you're causing harm to someone, you're taking someone's wealth, or you're causing damages, he speaks up every single time. Because by definition, the prophets of God, the messengers of God, they can't sit idly by if someone's right is being taken. And one was someone's life, one was someone's finances, one was, just the circumstances was calling for that. So we see that this is part and parcel of all the prophets and messengers of God. Before we even get into the domestic violence, I wanted to share a few verses talking about the beauty of marriage and relationships and how God sets the stage. Because if we're talking about the negative realm only, I want you to be able to compare it with something. I want you to be able to compare it with what the ideal is and what is God asking us to strive for. He says about the family in Surah Furqan that the believer makes a dua, a prayer to God saying, رَبَّنَا هَبْ لَنَا مِنْ أَزْوَاجِنَا وَذُرِّيَّاتِنَا قُرَّةَ أَعْيُنٍ وَجَعَلْنَا لِلْمُتَّقِينَ إِمَامًا. They call out to God and they say, our Master, هَبْ لَنَا مِنْ أَزْوَاجِنَا وَذُرِّيَّاتِنَا, that gift for us, grant us the coolness of our eyes from our spouses and from our children, and make us collectively leaders of those who are God conscious. Meaning, don't just make us, just average in the bunch, but no, we're asking God for excellence and striving. To not just be role models and bearers of excellence in a realm, but to be in that for all people, especially those who are God conscious. Now, even that wording where God says the dua that we're making, the prayer that we're making is making the coolness of our eyes. That doesn't really make sense to us in a modern day sense, but the turban that the Arabs used to wear, even now Arabs will wear it nowadays, it wasn't a fashion statement. It was actually like functional in the sense that they would unravel the turban when there would be sandstorms and desert storms happening, and they would unravel it and start wrapping up their faces and only leave a little bit of their eyes exposed. So to the Arabs, the idea of coolness of the eyes was that after you've been hit by this sand over and over again, you've been through this long journey, finally when you have access, when the weather's calmed down to water, you pick up this water and you put that water to your eyes, that relief that you feel. God is saying, pray that your family, your husbands, your wives, your children, your parents, your siblings, are that coolness for you, that relief for you. Could you imagine, right? Like the husband or the wife is like, oh God, I have to go home to that person again, right? Like they're thinking like many times, especially, those of us with kids and stuff, you're like, oh man, I had a long work day and now this one's gonna be all over my legs, gonna be all over me asking this and that, right? It's just natural as parents and the ups and downs of family life. There's gonna be stress also with this beautiful blessing that we have. That's just natural. But God is saying that pray for them to be the coolness of your eyes. That all the calamities and difficulties in the work life and the education, everything that's going on outside the house, when you're coming into the driveway, you're saying, I'm happy to be home. I can't wait to see my wife. I can't wait to see my husband. I can't wait to see my kids, right? That is the emotion that we should have when we're looking at our spouses and we're looking at our family members. If we look at how God talks about the relationship between husband and wife, He says, in Surah Rum, and I recite this verse like almost every single wedding. I'm doing a wedding this Saturday. I'm going to be reciting it anyways. It's like ingrained now in my brain. The verse from Surah Rum. He says, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أزواجا لتسكنوا إليها وجعل بينكم مودة ورحمة إن في ذلك لآيات لقوم يتفكرون. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and also from His miraculous signs is the fact that He created spouses for you from amongst yourselves. Now, in English, all that sounds like is a whole bunch of prepositions. For you, for amongst yourselves, what is all that doing, right? It's actually funny because these same prepositions are used in the Arabic language when the messenger of God is being referred to. That He is a messenger for you, from you. What does that mean? It means that when you are for someone, the same way that you want success for yourself and happiness for yourself, you want it for them as well. When you are from someone, the same way that you don't want distress to come to you, whether it be financial, physical, emotional, sexual, whatever kind of distress, the same way you don't want it for yourself, you don't want it for them. So the idea of, it's not just random prepositions, it's that relationship of husband and wife is so intimate, so close, that the success that you have, you want it for them as well. And the distress that you want to avoid that for them as well. You want to be the protectors and caretakers of one another. And God says, and this is the epic part, is that typically when God says ayat or miraculous signs in the Quran, He's referring to what? He's referring to the sun, the moon, He's referring to the mountains, the oceans, He's referring to all these natural phenomena around us. But He says, from these miraculous signs, this relationship of husband and wife, this relationship of marriage, that is a miraculous sign of God. You know how we have hashtag couple goals, right? Divine couple goals, right? And what he talks about is not just the fact that there's a relationship, but it's a relationship that has what? وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. An intense form of love, which is rooted in the care and wanting good of one another, and rahmah, mercy, compassion, forgiveness. It is very easy when we look at Hollywood, Bollywood, Instagram, TikTok, everything, right? When we see that relationships are, shown in the most perfect way possible and everything becomes happily ever after. No, God's giving us very clear indication. Well, when do you have love? When things are great and going well. When do you need mercy? Mercy is not when there's roses and butterflies and the nice brunch pictures and having your vacation. It's not during that time. Mercy is needed when I can't believe this person said this in front of my family or my friends. I can't believe they hurt me or caused me pain or distress in this way. I can't believe they said this to my mother or my father or to someone and it caused them distress. That mercy is required for the person who's wronged their spouse to say, I've caused harm to my spouse. I need to go and apologize. And that mercy is also required on the one who was receiving this kind of distress to be able to say, you know what? We can improve and we can move on in our relationship, right? We can try to improve as much as possible. And God finishes off the verse by saying that without a doubt, those who deeply contemplate and reflect, they will find miraculous signs in this relationship. And what's beautiful is that the entire passage, it talks about the night and the day. It talks about human beings and how they've been created in different backgrounds and colors and languages. And it's interesting to see that the verse that talks about marriage is right before the verse of talking about we've been created in different backgrounds and different kind of backgrounds and languages and different ethnic backgrounds and stuff as well. So it's almost like an indication that, look, why are you so divided amongst yourselves? Why is there so much hatred and arrogance and division amongst men and women, amongst different tribes and different people as well, when God tells you that we've created you for man and woman. We've created you into different tribes and people so you can get to know one another. And just in case you became arrogant because you are a man and you somehow believe you're superior, or just because you're a woman, somehow you believe you're superior, or you believe from Pakistan or from Sudan or from America or from Mexico, wherever you're from, don't believe just because of that your superiority is there. No, rather superiority is established by what? Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. The most noble of you are those who are the most God conscious. And guess what? God consciousness is not measured by this. It's not measured by a meter that you can detect on yourself, like, oh, I got my rings today of God consciousness, right? No, it doesn't work like that. God consciousness is something you can't even determine of your own self, let alone someone else. So literally God is telling us you cannot have this level of superiority. And the reason why I wanted to shift to that is because why is there violence or abuse? Why is it that a man or a woman might raise their hand at their partner or at their child or at a parent even? There's abuse to elderly as well. Why would it be that someone has gotten to a point that they're saying it's okay for me to lift my hand up and strike this person? If you think about even, let's take it back before even violence. If you think about the notion of just having very vulgar speech, right? Having very vulgar speech. Someone who's not able to express themselves, they might be limited in their vocabulary and what they're trying to share. So imagine even a young child, right? A young child, how does a child show distress? They just cry. And as they grow older, they might say, owie, ouch, hurts, right? And as they grow older and older, they'll be able to verbalize more and more. Well, individuals who are stunted in their growth in terms of their not their cognitive abilities, but in their ability to communicate properly, they might just resort to kind of using very simplistic things. I mean, for many men, the community over here knows, but I want to share with the rest of you guys as well. Both my wife and I are masters in our pastoral counseling. So we had a little bit of training in terms of being first responders in terms of care and helping out communities in terms of that. But many times when men come to sessions, and it's not always, but typically men are more limited in their vocabulary when it comes to expressing their emotions, right? It's just like, I'm angry. Why are you angry? It's like, because. It's like, because what? Well, because, my wife said something and I didn't like it. Well, what didn't you like about it? It caused me distress. What does that mean exactly? It hurt your feelings. Say that, right? It caused you pain. It hurt you in your dignity that when she said that, it hurt you deep down inside. Whereas a woman might come and say, well, you know what? It was very hurtful to me when this person said X, Y, and Z. And it's like it might take a couple of steps for the guys to get there, right? But anybody can really learn that. It's not something it's just unfortunate that many times in our society we're told that men are to be less expressive. Now, with that less expressiveness, unfortunately what happens? It becomes repressed, and it becomes something manifests in a way that we don't want it to manifest. It manifests itself in a way that instead of being able to learn how to speak your problems out, being able to speak through your problems, and even we see this with young children. When children just resort to temper tantrums or to just hitting someone, hold on, let's relax, let's calm down, let's take a couple breaths. What's wrong? Let's talk about it, right? And if we're not taught to be able to do that from a young age, then we ourselves grow up and we have these issues and trauma and baggages and anxiety. And soon as certain things get very challenging for us, we either become very withdrawn and irritable, or we're just very aggressive towards individuals. We have different kind of responses. Every single person's different. But one of those reasons why that violence can happen is that an individual has no idea how to properly communicate. And subhanAllah, it's not coming from a place of strength. That violence that's coming, it's not coming from a place of strength, it's coming from a place of weakness from that person. That person thinks there's nothing else I can do. This person will listen to the words I have to say, so the only way they'll finally eventually listen to what I have to say is by me striking them. How does that make sense? How does it logically make sense? To strike someone that you love, to hit someone and believe that now their actions will change based on what I've just done. Response. It's reported Sahih Bukhari where he says, I can't understand how one of you would be able to beat your spouse and then be able to go and sleep with them in the same bed that night. What kind of audacity do you have to be able to do this? There was even a time where multiple women had come to complain in the home of the Messenger of God to say that our spouses are physically abusing us. He went out the next day, and we know as Muslims, the Friday prayer is typically when we congregate and we have the sermon, right? He had Bilal radiallahu anhu, and this was, sometimes he would do this, he had Bilal radiallahu anhu call the call for prayer, the entire adhan. And it was not one of the prayer times. He called the call to prayer, he gathered all the Muslims together, they prayed, and then he gave them a sermon. And he said, what is wrong with those individuals? That God has given you an amana, has given you a trust, meaning your family, your relationships that we have. This is a trust from God. This is a responsibility and a huge blessing from God. And he says, what is wrong with you? That you raise your hands and you strike your spouses. And he fought against these ideas. He fought against these ideas. So the fact that Aisha radiallahu anha, she said, the Messenger of God, peace be upon him, never struck a woman, nor did he ever strike a servant. The only time the Messenger of God was ever physical was that on the battlefield. But when it came outside, he wouldn't even verbally rebuke young kids even. Anas ibn Malik, who served him for about 10 or 12 years, he says that the 10 years that I served the Messenger of God, remember, like he's at the age of 10, 10-year-old kids are going to mess up, make mistakes. He says that he never rebuked me. He never like yelled at me or shouted at me. I'm a father of one, right? I don't know how that's even possible. Like, I don't even know how you, like, you can interact with kids and you don't be like, hey, stop, cut it out, right? The Messenger of God dealt with people with such kindness. But not to say that he wasn't, obviously, there were times where he had to be rough and had to be harsh with individuals. And he did that. When these situations would come about, where people's rights were being taken, men or women, he would stand up against it. He would call that person to justice. And he would make sure that the appropriate thing was done. There was even a young woman who wanted to get married, and she had 3 kind of prospects. And she had asked the Messenger of God, well, what do you suggest? And she said, and the Messenger of God said, well, honestly, this first one, this person is not in a very good financial situation. The second one is known for causing abuse to people and harming people physically, so I would definitely stay away from that person. And the third one seems like a good individual. So the Messenger of God gave his advice. So he was mindful of, wait a minute, someone might have some prior history of doing these actions, be a bit mindful and engaging with this person. And in the past couple of days, we've been talking a lot about redemption and talking about the idea of the cancel culture and kind of, integration in the community and the many of the programs we were doing. But we can see that unequivocally, when it comes to the Messenger of God, who Aisha radiallahu anha describes as the walking Qur'an, his character was the Qur'an, the divine revelation itself. we see unequivocally, he never even raised his hand to harm a man, let alone harm his own spouse or to harm a daughter or a child. He was known to be so loving and so not intimidating, so friendly and welcoming, that there was narrations of a young girl being able to grab the hand of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and walk him around the city of Medina and be like, hey, this is this over here and that's over here. Just like, taking him and just being a kid. So we see that the Messenger of God, unequivocally, through his own actions and through his statements, that there was meant to be justice and no harm was to come. The Messenger of God also tells us, and I've told the students this many, many times, and when it comes to relationship with parents, with family members, with anyone, the Messenger of God said, "La darara wa la dirar," which means there is absolutely no harm to be done, and if you have been harmed, there is no reciprocating of harm. Obviously, you can do daf'u sa'il, which is to protect yourself, but it's not an eye for an eye type of religion. We don't go around causing, oh, I was harmed, well, I'm going to go ahead and take your money too, and I'm going to cause you distress as well. No, that's injustice. One injustice is not resolved by another injustice. The Messenger of God never taught us this. He rather taught us to be merciful and kind and forgiving. And at the same time, we're also taught if someone has wronged us, it is not an obligation upon you to even forgive them. The obligation is, or rather not the obligation, but it's not an obligation on you to forgive them, rather it's up to you. If you want to take that into the divine court of God, on the day of judgment, that day is there for you. You have your option and your right to do that. But even though in the Quran we're told, if you are merciful and you forgive that individual, then that opens up even more mercy of God to us. But again, when it comes to the realm of domestic violence and abuse, we have even statements of the Messenger of God when it came to women that would come and complain of abuse and want to complain of that. And when we get to a place where the person was in danger, the Messenger of God actually annulled marriages right there and then on the spot. He brought the man in, he brought the woman in, he had the discussion, he heard both sides, and he would annul the marriage if he said that this was too dangerous or too difficult of a situation. So from our deen, from our religion, there's no justification you can have. And if any of the Muslims want to ask the more challenging questions, we can go into those as well, but there's certain ayat and verses that I misquoted. But I'll tell you this, those individuals that would use their religion to justify this, what justification can you have when the Messenger of God did not do it himself? He did not raise his hand. He rebuked the men who engage in this practice. And by the way, we know that domestic violence is common, for even a man to be abused, or children or elderly to be abused as well. But in that society particularly, remember what kind of society we're coming from. We're coming from a society that before Islam, baby girls would be seen as, well, it wasn't a boy, bury her alive. You're coming from a society where God even quotes that He says, وَإِذَا الْمَوْءُودَةُ سُئِلَتْ بِأَيِّ ذَنْبٍ قُتِلَتْ. On the day of judgment, the baby girl would be asked, the one who was buried alive, rhetorically she'd be asked, for what sin were you killed? And now those who actually had done this crime against her, they will be put on trial. So we're coming from a society where women were seen as property, they were inherited. The physical abuse was a common thing amongst not just women, but anybody, right? You could cause harm. There was no set law over there that if you caused distress, whatever. If you were rich and powerful, you could get away with things. And you could say arguably that's still kind of the case today. But if you were rich and powerful, if you were famous, you were well known, you could get away with whatever you want. And that was the case. And now in a society where the Messenger of God is coming and saying, no, every single human being, whether Muslim or not, Allah has said, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. Allah says we have honored the children of Adam, regardless of their faith, regardless of who they are. But now when you're talking about believers, and a believing man and a believing woman, you both believe in God, and you both are trying to please God. But now in that pursuit, you let your emotions, you let certain things get out of hand. Instead of going to counseling and being able to seek out betterment for your relationship, in the early stages, you get to a place where the communication has crumbled apart so badly, it's deteriorated so badly, that now the human being thinks the only way I can get my point across, the only way I can make things right is by causing harm. And many times us coming from our various backgrounds from around the world, it could be that it was very common, that we come from very male-dominant societies, or we come from societies where beating and causing physical distress to individuals is a common thing. I mean, let's be very frank. We even know that in many Muslim schools where the Quran is memorized, kids are being physically beaten, and I think, alhamdulillah, at least in the US, that's stopped for the most part. But in many parts of the world, it's a common thing. How could it be that you're teaching the divine revelation of God, and you're beating it into a child. How does that make any sense? The child is reciting Ar-Rahman, the abundantly merciful, and you're physically beating the kid because he's messing up. Like, what world do we live in? What world do we live in? Did the Messenger of God do any of these things? Or have we corrupted the religion in certain aspects? And we have to be able to call it out as it is. It doesn't matter if it's a scholar, if it's a teacher of Islam, it doesn't matter who it is. If you're going against what God and His Messenger brought, then you have to be called out for that, especially if it is taking the right of another. Because that is something the Messenger of Allah did not stand for. The Messenger of God said, help your brother, the oppressor and the oppressed. And the companion said, I know how I can help the oppressed. How do I help the oppressor? And he said, help him against shaitan, help him against the devil. Stop that individual, prevent that individual from causing distress. And the beautiful thing is, subhanAllah, many times in our society, in our culture, talking about the US, the cancel culture is very prevalent today. If someone has done any kind of mistake before, you are done, you are excommunicated from the society, you are done, you are a lost cause, get lost. You're not to be here anymore. The Messenger of God said, help your brothers, the oppressor and the oppressed. If we don't help with the reform of the oppressors, they will go and oppress others. We cannot be blind to the fact that people are being oppressed. Help those who are oppressed. But if we're not helping the oppressors reform, we're also contributing to the further denigration of society. And subhanAllah, I'll tell you one of the most horrific scenes I ever I encountered in terms of a client. There was a woman who was trying to get divorced from her spouse, and she knew that her husband had been married previously. And as she was in the process, the lawyers that she was working with said, well, have you ever seen the documents of your husband and the court, the paperwork that was there on your husband and his previous marriage? And she said, no, I just knew that he got divorced. And literally, verbatim, word for word, the complaints that she had, this current wife that she was trying to get divorced, of physical abuse, of anger issues, all those things, it read out like a horror movie. It's like as if you stumble into the scene and it's like the exact same thing is playing out. And that's our fault as a community, as family members, as people in the community who are seeing things that are problematic, but yet we're not doing anything to reform that. We have to help those who are oppressed, absolutely. But we also have to do the job of making sure that we're taking care of those individuals who are still going to get remarried or going to have access to young people or to others who could possibly be oppressed. So we have to be proactive in this matter as much as we can, inshallah. With that, if there's any kind of questions, we'll kind of open up the floor for you guys. Otherwise, we'll pass it over to our amazing guests who took the time out to be able to join us this evening. Any questions from anyone? Yes, bismillah.
So I've heard there's this verse in the Quran that a lot of men use to justify domestic violence.
Excellent.
Remember, verbatim, I'm sure you do. It's
Yeah.
the one where if the wife doesn't listen to you 3 times, you either you shun her the first time and you just the second time, the third time strike her.
Sure.
You know,
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. So,
and so that has caused a lot of controversy.
yeah.
And confusion among people. People say oh no, they meant you strike her with something like a small twig, or no, you don't strike her at all. They mean verbally, but there's just been a lot of confusion around that. Can you
Sure, yeah. I was waiting for somebody to bring it up if they wanted to bring it up. I wanted to make sure we set the foundation of the entire discussion, right? And if you've already seen, again, who shows us the embodiment of the Quran? Who shows us the live example of the Quran? The Quran is not an independent text by itself. It is the lived experience of the Messenger of God, right? He shows us how to live the Quran because he gets revelation on what it means. And he is, by the way, it says in the Quran that he is the one لِتُبَيِّنَ لِلنَّاسِ, right? That he is the one who will clarify and show people and make the verses clear. So many times, again, this is the problem of not just Muslims, but even people that want to misquote texts, whether they're Muslim, they're extreme groups, whatever they are, they will look at a text and interpret it according to what they see fit. Okay, so how would you interpret that verse if the Messenger of God is calling out anyone and everyone who is causing harm to their spouse? Another man came to the Prophet of God and said, what are the rights of my wife upon me? Like, what do I have to do for her? Some of the things that he mentioned, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this is reported in Abu Dawood, some of the things he mentioned was that, number one, he mentioned that the same food that you eat, that's the same type of food she should be eating. The same type of clothing you have, that's the type of clothing you should have. Again, this seems common sense to us now, but think about a society where they're coming from, where women are second class. You will have the steaks and the ribeyes, and she will have the bones and the veggies and, she'll have the secondary stuff. you will have better clothing and you'll just clothe her with whatever, right? Because they're secondary. You're just using them as items. The Messenger of God said, no, the way your lifestyle is, that is exactly how her lifestyle will be. And he also said, you will not physically hurt her. You will not harm her. He doesn't just say physical. Next he says, وَلَا تُقَبِّحْهَا. That's the word qabih in the Arabic language means ugly. It doesn't mean like don't call her ugly. Don't make her feel as if she's something discarded, something evil, something repulsed, something negative. Think about that. Even husbands, think about sometimes that we, and husbands and wives, honestly, when we say certain things to our spouse, what kind of like vile things we're saying to them. Where the Messenger of God said, not only should you not even strike the person, but when it comes to that emotional realm, don't say something that would make her feel unwanted or disliked, right? SubhanAllah, the Messenger of God is telling us these beautiful things. Now when it comes to the actual verse, if you read the actual verse, I'll give you the verse number if someone can actually help me out. It's Surah An-Nisa, Nushuz. Let me find it. What is it? 34? Yes, it is. Verse 34. So Surah An-Nisa, it's the 4th chapter, and it is the 34th verse. You can look into it in detail, inshallah, but I'll give you the gist of it. It actually starts off with something that's also very controversial to people. الرِّجَالُ قَوَّامُونَ عَلَى النِّسَاءِ. Right? And this word qawwam, what does it mean that a man is qawwam over women? Qawwam, qama yaqumu, I've talked about this with the students before. Qama yaqumu in the Arabic language, what it means is to be someone who carries out a task. Allah's name is Al-Qayyum, right? He is the one who is ever watching, someone who is watchfully there, protectively watching over. So God is saying that one of the duties a man has been given over every single person, female in their life, is what? To be someone who is a caretaker looking out for them. That is one of the primary meanings of qawwam. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala later he talks about the ayah that we're talking about. وَاللَّاتِي تَخَافُونَ نُشُوزَهُنَّ. Talking to the men. And for those women that you fear their nushuz, what does nushuz mean? The scholar said nushuz is that you're afraid that they are going to, and this is talking about husband and wife relationship, right? That you're afraid that they're about to like go and cheat on you and they're talking to someone else. That individual has gotten to that extent, the Prophet, or rather Allah tells us in that verse, that you do a couple of things. Number one, advise them. فَعِذُوهُنَّ. Wa'adh is a sincere advice that comes from one heart that's meant to go into the other person's heart. If that doesn't work, the next thing is, what do? وَهْجُرُوهُنَّ فِي الْمَضَاجِعِ. Then be able to say, you know what? You sleep on the bed, I'm going to go over there. So it's, and even the wording is precise. It's not you kick them out of the house. It's وَهْجُرُوهُنَّ. You leave them in the bed. So you're not even, like to the extent that even when you're upset with this person, you're not going to tell them, you go sleep on the bed. You're the one who's doing these things messed up. No, you go leave. Don't make them leave the house and force them out of the house. Don't kick them out of the house, especially if they're financially dependent upon you. And even we know in divorce, when the person is divorced, those 3 months of being able to make sure that you're not just kicking someone out of the house. There has to be a level of maintenance and there's well-being is looked out for in Islam. And then finally it says, وَضْرِبُوهُنَّ. Okay? Darb in the Arabic language is used in multiple ways in the Quran. Darb is used for an example to be given. ضَرَبَ اللَّهُ مَثَلًا. Darb is also used, يَضْرِبُونَ فِي الْأَرْضِ. They walk on the earth to go seek out the provision of God. So darb also can be used in modern day Arabic as what? Just, this is darb as well, to strike. And even when it comes to strike an example, like ضَرَبَ اللَّهُ مَثَلًا, that Allah struck an example, right? Or people will say Allah gave an example. Same way, different things. So darb, again, this goes back to how did the scholars interpret it? Well, if you look at how did the Prophet of God live it? Can you tell me that darb means over here to physically hit someone? How does that make any sense when the Prophet of God is giving you statement after statement after statement, rebuking men, how dare you hit them? What's wrong with people like you? What is wrong with one of you that would hit your spouse and then go to bed with them or try to go to sleep with them? How could you even do this? And these are all reported in the most authentic books that we have of the statements of God. So darb over here, for those scholars that did say it meant an actual physical thing, darb was described as darb غير مبرح. So again, that's what it means is like, imagine if someone like was to take like a tassel or like a miswak, for those who know, like even a toothbrush would hurt. Like I'm trying to think of something that we can kind of, a twig, there we go, twigs work, right? Not even a twig. Miswak is like actually like a very malleable piece of wood, and it's like a very soft thing. Just imagine if someone went like this, right? Like imagine if a husband and wife went like, you know, the wife said something, it's like, come on, get out of here, right? Or like a husband said something, come on, get out of here. when you get to that point of anger, what we're being told is the furthest extent, the upper limit of what a physical thing would even look like would be something like that. Like, no, I don't want you to talk to me. No, I've had enough with you. You can't even go beyond that limit. This is talking about the upper limits of something. This is not talking about, oh, well, I can do this, and then I can do this, and then I can do, no, it's not talking about that. It's talking about the upper limits of where you can go to, because the Prophet of God has already clearly told you. And some scholars said, no, it does not even have to do with anything physical, because darb also can refer to walking away from something. So meaning now, what it's alluding to is that, number one, you gave them admonition, you kind of gave them, try to talk things out. Then you left them in the bed. You said, you know what, I'm not going to even be around you now. I'm going to just stay away from you. And then finally, you just walk away from the relationship because this person is not loyal, they're not faithful, you can't stay with them, right? And honestly, even those scholars who went to the extent that said that, no, it was talking about a physical thing, it was talking about a physical thing in a sense of like that would not be something that's physically painful or causing them distress in that way. And people that will justify their spousal abuse because of this, they're justifying their action because of the ayah. They're not looking at the verse and saying, oh, let me go do this, as something that's a noble thing to do. Rather, they're already engaged in some kind of action, and as many people would do. They will take the religion of God, they'll take a statement of God or the messenger and say, well, justify my behavior, well, this is the reason why. Well, what about the actions of the Prophet of God? He never did it himself. He rebuked individuals. So I hope that gives a bit more clarity. I don't know if I did it justice, but I tried to kind of give you a summary of all of that, inshallah. Any other thoughts, questions? Nothing? Great. I can go back to Houston? All right, Bismillah. We'll have our guests please share some words. I'll just move out of this chair just so we can have them come over here and they can sit over here, inshallah. Let me make some space for y'all. No, I'm fine. I'll just go off to the side. I don't think I'm needed anywhere.
Assalamu alaikum. Okay, Jazakallah khair for that very beneficial discussion and clarification, Imam Mahad. Before we have Denise from Health Promotion talk about campus and off-campus resources, I would like to speak about some resources from our surrounding cities of Houston and Austin. Well, first of all, I'll start off with the domestic violence hotline, which is 1-800-799-7233, and the last four numbers spell out SAFE, so you can also easily search it up in case you can't remember. Or I'll also ask Tasha to put it on the announcements. And also, you can also text START, START, to the number 88788. That is like a texting hotline also. And then in Houston, we have An-Nisa Hope Center. So they deal with case management, counseling, helpline, education and resource, short-term financial assistance, and empowerment trainings to help the victim or the survivor in the relationship get back on their feet and maybe get out of a current abusive relationship. And then we also have Asians Against Domestic Abuse. This is generally for the Asian community. And they do support services, legal advocacy, court accompaniment, social services assistant. And we have another great resource, which is DAIA. Yeah.
Is that from DAIA?
No, the other one was different. This one is DAIA. So the other one is called Asians Against Domestic Abuse. But DAIA is, since they are being funded by the government and they receive a lot of money, they can provide more long-term support for victims and survivors. So they also have holistic case management, and DAIA is mostly for the South Asian community. However, I'm sure other ethnic communities can also reach out to them for assistance. And in Austin, we have Asian Family Support Services of Austin, which also focuses on the Asian and ethnic communities. And then also I would like to highlight Peaceful Families. They have a lot of domestic violence resources targeted towards Muslims, such as toolkits, a directory of resources in case you want to refer a friend or a family from another state. They have a whole directory of domestic violence resources for Muslims and for the Asian community in different other states. Okay, without further ado, we will ask Denise to come up here. You can come up.
You're more than welcome to go up to the table or
Yes.
wherever you prefer.
Good evening, and thank you so much. We're gonna try it. Hold on. Maybe not.
Is it the center button?
Is it the center one? Sorry. First thing you want to do is always make sure that it's switched to on. There's that part. All right, well, I'm going to take a seat. So one, I really want to thank Imam Mahad for the presentation. It's always wonderful to hear about this through different perspectives, which is something we value incredibly at our university because we are such a college-driven community, right? Between Texas A&M and our Blinn campuses. So a lot of the conversations that we have, we don't tend to do them generally. There's good general information, but we try to reach different parts and sectors of our community to look at their intersectional identities and what that means to them in terms of this conversation. I also want to thank our graduate assistant, Deja Jackson, for doing resource tabling with us today, and also John Hill, who works in health promotion with us as a specialist. So I really appreciate Ania was a graduate assistant in our office for a year from December 2020 to, what year are we in, to 2021. Sorry, there was like a void of time there. But Ania was incredibly instrumental in helping us with our bystander intervention programs and really help us build those up. So she had asked me to come in tonight to let you all know what our campus is doing, which I think is just an incredibly important lens, right? Because I know some of you are students, some of you may have children who are thinking about applying to Texas A&M. So what is our campus really doing to address domestic violence and relationship violence and wellness? And for those of you who maybe don't have a connection to A&M other than it being in our community, what are some of our localized resources that are important to know about, and how are they working together to address this in Brazos Valley as well? So I'm a very visual person. So I brought this with us because I wanted to kind of let you all know that we shouldn't be the best kept secret at Texas A&M. Unfortunately, for a lot of our students, we remain that way. I think a lot of folks hear violence prevention and they think that we are our Title IX office. And while we do some lovely work with our friends there, we are not the same because Title IX is largely response where we are prevention. So we try to prevent all the things that you heard about tonight and we talked about from happening through education and knowledge and understanding what these things look like, not only as to people in our lives, but as bystanders, right? So if we're seeing it happen to someone we care about or love or who's part of our community, or the communities that we define. So this is our mission statement here. It's embracing a culture of holistic well-being to advance our students' personal, academic, and professional success. So that's really our foundational work at the university. And there are a couple of different ways that we do this. You can see we do it through violence prevention. That is my purview. So just by way of kind of a delayed introduction to myself, my entire role at the university besides supporting health and wellness is violence prevention. It's what my position description mandates that I do. It's helping our students have the skills to understand what a healthy relationship really is supposed to look like versus what they might have been told it's supposed to look like through popular culture references is usually their primary lens. I know for the students in the room, it's like, where'd you get most of it? Well, conversations with my family sometimes, but unfortunately reinforced through our growth and development through social media and pop culture references, which are not always the most healthy, right? So can be skewed, can also undo some of the messages that we try to, I'm a parent myself, undo some of the messages that we try to instill in our children and cause them confusion with what it is that they believe that they are supposed to be receiving, and also giving as a part of those. We also work with alcohol and other substance abuse prevention on campus, and also what we call general wellness, and that honestly encompasses a lot of things: stress and time management, healthy eating. What does it mean to engage in sleep hygiene? That's one of my favorite topics, because who doesn't really love a good sleep? Yes, but kind of moving on then. I want to start with kind of telling you, so this is our wellness wheel. I'm not going to go through all of these with you tonight because I want to focus on the resource part of it, but to give you context for why health promotion has these three areas, because we get that question a lot. It's like, okay, all important stuff, but why is violence prevention, alcohol prevention, and wellness all in the same place? Right? One of the primary lenses we have for that is what is wellness, right? So if we have a stressor that we're experiencing in life, right, all or one of these things or a couple of them are going to be impacted, right? And they might be impacted at different times, but they're all eventually going to be impacted in some way. I think in the context, obviously, of relationship violence and domestic violence, it's physical, right, emotional, social, and potentially even financial because of resources and who has access to what, right? And then we could bring in that social aspect because of family and community on top of it. But if we maybe take domestic violence out of that conversation, I mean, just think about times throughout our lives. Like, financial wellness might be at the forefront of some considerations right now, right? Because we are experiencing inflation, so we've seen it a lot with our students. So our work ebbs and flows also with what's happening around us and what our students are and are not experiencing at a given point in time. And so this is one of my favorite graphics. I use it with permission from an individual who I attended a conference with, from John Hopkins. And essentially, when he showed me this graphic, it made all the sense for why our office is does what they do. So here in the middle, we have like basically any public health issue, right? So I could put domestic violence into that purple bubble in the middle for you. And essentially, all of these impacts could be considerations. And the way that we look at it is, what are those short and long-term mental health impacts? What are communicable and non-communicable disease-based risk factors, especially when we think about the long-term impacts of stress and physical violence? What does this look like for risk-taking and coping? That's where our alcohol and substance use can really come in, because unfortunately, especially with our students, if they don't have positive coping mechanisms, they might start using those substances to really just tune out and not feel. And it might not be a disorder at the outset, but it turns into one. Because their tolerance level, they need more and more, so it becomes an addiction. And then also, where applicable, child and maternal health, right? So when you look at this, I could also put alcohol and other drug use in that purple bubble, and a lot of those things would be the same. We could have chronic illness or disease, so we can really move those around, and those outcomes, that's why we are where we are. So when we talk about interpersonal violence prevention, which is my purview, y'all talked about this pretty at length tonight. I really enjoyed the different aspects of, and when we think about community and we think about family that come into that, but there are a lot of understandings of when we say interpersonal violence, what do we mean? Like, what is it that we're really talking about? And so the definition at the top is World Health Organization and Centers for Disease Control specific. And what it really is it's intentional. So the power and control piece is at the center. It's the driver of a lot of it. Right, and it's sort of this very intentional, power and control-driven need to take control over an individual, a group, or a community through use of primarily physical violence, but it can be other forms of violence as well, and abuse. And so the way that we break it down is across the life, of course, because we're public health. But if you look at the types there, that's not an all-inclusive list, but it's a list that's very important, because I think for our college students, when they hear domestic violence, they think of marriage. Right? They think only of marriage, and for some of them, they're like, that's not my life purview yet, so I'm going to opt out of that conversation, like I'm going to tune out of it. But what we want them to understand is that obviously it can be domestic violence, can be child abuse and neglect. It can also be between siblings. It can be between other family members. It can also, on our campus and in our community, involve roommates. So a lot of our students, once they hear that, they're like, oh, okay, so if I have a contractual obligation and I'm living with someone, even if we're not related, and they're hurting me, right, that's actually considered a form of domestic violence per federal guidelines that we use at the university, and in some of our jurisdictions in the state as well. So, you know, per that contract, it's really important to know that it's the living arrangement. And then obviously folks have child in common. But you can see it goes throughout the life course, and we want folks to know that. We talked about elder abuse tonight, that was mentioned, child abuse and neglect, youth violence in our community. I know that over the last year we've talked about some gang formation here in Bryan College Station, and I came from Orlando, Florida. And then before that, I lived in Cleveland, Ohio. So for me, moving here seemed very idyllic. And then when I heard that there were gangs kind of happening in Northgate a little bit, I was like, I had to take pause for a second. I'm like, really? I was like, okay, well, that's interesting to know, but that's a form of youth violence, and so it goes across the life course. And then, of course, the different type of abuses. They're not always going to manifest as physical, and that was such a huge part of our conversation tonight, as we know. But if I were to ask students and young people, when you think about violence, what do you think of? Most of the time, they're going to go right to physical forms of violence, and all of the other types that we tend to see first in terms of that mechanism get completely lost on them, and they know they're unhealthy, but they don't necessarily identify them as abusive, right? We can get splitting hairs with that terminology, but sometimes it's intent versus impact, right? So in unhealthy relationships, some folks may use those as coping mechanisms. They don't necessarily mean for it to cause harm, but there's a self-reflection point in that, right? Like if they want to be a better person or be healthy, they have to reflect on how that hurts someone and communicate that in terms of their expression. But with power and control and abuse, it's very intentional, and there's usually no remorse for it whatsoever. And so that's a little bit of the difference between the intent versus the impact of it. And so I wanted to share this, and I will share with Ania as well this link so that you all have that. But there is a QR code with it. This is a page that we have put together on our site that provides at the bottom there a comprehensive list of our campus and community resources. And the way that we break them down is by what is confidential and what is not, right? And so if you ask me what my preference is, if I take my mandated reporting responsibilities out of my job, because I am one at the university, right, by law, if I take that out of it, what I would recommend all the time is that if someone's experiencing harm, that they are open to a resource, that they go to confidential first, because you have a whole lot of things that are helpful there, right? You have crisis counseling, you have long-term counseling potentially, you have folks who know the legal system, they know where to get medical care, in which places have forensic exams available, what don't. And when someone's going through trauma, obviously, hearing all of that in little different places can be incredibly overwhelming. And if somebody gets overwhelmed and they're like, God, this person didn't know how to answer my question, they're probably not going to reach out for a while if they ever do again. So with the confidential resources, I'd like to let you know in our community, we have 4 primary ones that we like to talk about, and I do have, there are flyers on our resource tables. First is our Twin City Mission Domestic Violence Services. They are our local domestic violence resource center. They serve everyone, but they are the emergency shelter. So if someone's trying to get away in terms of a safety plan, they don't have anywhere else to go, or they don't want their location known, that would be the place that would provide that, plus things like, you know, child counseling, individualist counseling, economic kind of like job training, things that will move someone towards independence that has been taken away. We also have our Sexual Assault Resource Center of Brazos Valley, where they are in their 40th year of serving our 7-county region. They are a primary response mechanism to any type of sexual abuse or violence that is happening to minors and adults, regardless of their other identity aspects. So they also work with Twin City Mission. And then one that is lesser known, but I really do enjoy their organization and what they are able to do is Unbound Now. I'm not sure how many of you have heard of them. We are fortunate enough to actually have one of their 5 Texas offices here in Bryan. They are also recently global. They started doing human trafficking response globally, but they are a human trafficking prevention and response organization. Not just in our state, but they also have, I think, 3 global locations at this moment. And they just got a whole bunch of stuff through Brazos Valley Gives. So if anybody follows that, I think they were second on our leaderboard. They got quite a bit here, but they are an organization that seems to be not well known. But for those of you who are unaware, Texas, I believe, is the 2nd or 3rd in our country for known human trafficking cases. Because we are a large state and we have a lot of highway systems that cut through here. I-10's the biggest one, so the fact that we have 5 offices is amazing here for us. And then Scotty's House, which is our local group that works as child protection services, that works with minors, especially those who might be in the foster care system. So just good things to know about what is confidential and what is not. I will also say seek medical services wherever you are obviously comfortable and where is accessible. But right now in our community, if someone is seeking a forensic exam for any type of harm, it doesn't matter what the nature of the harm is, but they have been physically injured in some way. Baylor Scott and White Medical Center on Rock Prairie Road and Highway 6 is currently our only facility that has forensic nurses on call 24/7. Now, our other hospital units have them on call, it's just not 24/7. So if someone's seeking that care and the immediacy, we do refer them there just because of that connection. Okay, but all of that is in the QR code. And I do want to know on campus what we're doing is we work with those 4 organizations and many others, honestly, on campus to steward prevention programming. So you can see our 3 major ones up here: Domestic Violence Awareness Month, which we're doing this month in October, Sexual Assault Prevention and Awareness Month in April, and then what we've now branded Aggies Against Violence, and here's why: because there were just too many labels going around. That encompasses stalking prevention and awareness, human trafficking prevention and awareness, and dating violence prevention and awareness, which naturally all occur around the same time. So we came up with a fancy name for it last year, and all of our students thought we were an org. And I'm like, no, we're not an org, but if you want to join, please come anyway, right? Please come out and engage with it anyway. But we do concerted programming around at these times of year, and then carries out throughout the rest of the year as well. And then I do want to share a little bit about our alcohol and other drug prevention programming. It is something on our campus that, alcohol on our campus, we are an SEC school, people use it, our students use it. Unfortunately, it is just widely accessible to them, even under the age of 21. I wish it wasn't, but when we talk about it in the context of not just social use, but let's go back to what I was saying before about coping mechanisms. What we find a lot with our students is when we have somebody with a substance use addiction, what happened was it stemmed from a trauma. It wasn't because they went to a party and had a shot that was offered to them. It's because, unfortunately, they were able to access it somewhere from someone, and the effects of it helped them not feel or helped them feel better temporarily, and so they started obviously upping their increase of that substance to numb what was happening with them, and it turned into an addiction. So on our QR code there, we do have some recovery services that we work with in the community. I will say, and I'm sure John can attest, we find, I think, that a lot of our students, when they're talking about recovery, would much rather go off campus than remain on it, because it is an issue that I think a lot of our students struggle with. They don't want to be kind of seen or known as having that problem on campus to their peers. So we do have several recovery services that we work with in the community and do very concerted programming with to offer sober tailgate options. We just did our Run for Recovery last Saturday, which was a 5K on campus to raise funding and awareness for our services in the community. And that's what these are here. So I was talking about the QR code before we got there, and we do binge drinking campaigns. I had a student ask me last week, when are you under the influence? And I was like, fair question. I was like, when you ingest it, even if you're not. And they're like, but when am I? And I'm like, when you ingest it. Like, even if you don't feel like you have any effects from it, at that point you are. And so there's a lot of misunderstandings about when they're binge drinking. So we do a lot of education about, like, what does that actually look like? And for anybody who is curious about what that looks like, it's five standard drinks in 2 hours or less for someone born male identified at birth, and 4 of those drinks in 2 hours or less for someone identified as female at birth. Physiology. So yeah, our students sometimes don't know that, and they're like, oh, well, I only had like 1 shot, and I'm like, was that shot the color purple and out of a vat at a party? And some of them are like, yes, and I'm like, well, that's like way more than 1 standard drink. So there, you can imagine there's a lot of education we have to do around this with our campus. And then this is where we are situated. So has everyone been on our campus? I had the opportunity to be on it. Yes, so we are in this new building. If you approach Rudder Plaza with the fountain, you've kind of got the Memorial Student Center, Rudder Tower. We're that newer building that was constructed. We share space in that building with counseling and psychological services, our disability and accessibility resources, and also various parts of residence life. And then student life consists of a lot of different things. Our office, graduate and professional student government. We also have our student assistant services in that office, our student legal services. If anyone is ever in an issue with a landlord, Rick is your person. Oh, he really gets a kick out of it, I will tell you what. He's like one of the best people we have conversations with. But we also have our Women's Center in there. We do have an LGBT resource center in there, but we are in our new student and family program. So we are very student-oriented in that building, but we do work with our faculty and staff as well. So if you'd like to learn more, you can follow us there on our social media accounts. We are currently in Facebook meta jail. I don't know why. We've been for John, that's news too. We've been in there for a week. I have no idea why they're reviewing our page. And I'm like, the last thing we posted was Run for Recovery, so I don't know why. But we have some good content up there, but Instagram or Twitter if you want to now, or Twitter, depending. But I would say Instagram if you're on it would be the best bet, but our website as well. But I believe I'm right on time for you, Ania. So I want to be respectful of your program. So if there's time for questions, I can take it. If not, I can talk after.
I was hoping questions, because we do have to start cleaning up for a prayer, but if anyone does have any questions, we do have resource tables set out in the men's lobby as well as in the women's lobby. You can talk to Denise in the women's lobby, and men can talk to John in the men's lobby in case you all have any questions regarding resources, what health promotion does. And I'm sure Imam Mahad, are you still open to questions? Okay, any quick questions Imam Mahad can also take as well. But Jazakumullahu khairan for coming to this event and for showing a warm welcome to our guests here. So, yeah, Jazakumullahu khairan. Sorry,